Welcome to which star show? Oh, we're FrankieSense and More right now. We're a couple of days early. I couldn't remember which show we were doing. Welcome to FrankieSense and More 2024. Wow. Good to see you guys. I hope everybody had a really good holiday and Happy New Year to everybody. I'm here with my good friend Brent Marchant. We're going to discuss some January movies for you.
Yeah, it's a new year and time for new movies, so we got a long list to go through today. Just to let viewers know what we're doing, we're going to be doing several featured films, and then we're going to be doing some kind of quick passing references to other ones that are worth seeing as well, simply because time wouldn't permit us to do full reviews of everything. So starting off with our featured films, the first one is the new movie from director Yorgos Lanthimos, Poor Things, which is one of the most unusual diverse films I've seen, not just this year, but in recent years. It's a film that combines a number of different genres to tell a story that makes some very important points and delivers a very important message. But you wouldn't necessarily think immediately that this would be the kind of ideal vehicle for doing that. This combines comedy, romance, science fiction, social commentary, and it seems like a really unusual blend, but it works really well. This is the story of it's set in Victorian England, and it tells the story of a surgeon, educator, scientist who conducts some strange experiments, but makes him a little bit like, Dr. Frankenstein, but he's really more benevolent than mad or nasty or anything like that. So he's out walking around London one day, and he's going past a bridge over the Thames, and he discovers at the base of it there's a young woman who has apparently committed suicide. He notices that she's probably not got any brain activity, but she's not dead. She's still got vital signs going. He also notices that she's pregnant. Well, being the creative doctor that he is, he figures I can probably save her. And, between my surgical techniques and my special reanimation devices, I can take the brain of the unborn child and put it in the woman.
This is where it gets interesting.
and it works. And it works. The only hitch in that is the fact that now you've got a full-grown woman with an infant's brain, and he's having a little trouble controlling her. So he ends up having one of his med students help him out, to see if he can figure out how to get her more developed and so forth. And actually, he's able to make some progress with it, but what's most interesting is that she really starts making her greatest progress when she discovers her own sexuality. Not only does she get pleasure from it, but she has...
everybody get pleasure from it.
Yeah, the thing is, she has remarkable advances in articulation and creativity and insight and so forth. And he's really impressed with this, so much so that he actually thinks maybe it's a good idea if, my assistant weds her. So, but he says that it's important that she stay in the house because I don't know if she's ready to go out on her own yet. So the doctor hires a well-known but rather unscrupulous attorney to draw up a contract to make that happen. And in the process, the lawyer becomes smitten with the woman, and she becomes smitten with him, especially in return for the servicing that he provides her. And she grows a very strong sense of independence and says, you know what? He's invited me to go on a trip with him. I'm going to go. And everybody,
I think we should let viewers, go see this movie themselves and find out. But what's really interesting about this, first of all, Emma deserves an award for this.
Oh yeah, she's great.
Playing, a 2-year-old brain up to, self-actualization is just absolutely brilliant. She's brilliant at it. I think that this is a movie you love or you hate.
Yeah.
My partner did not like it. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I did too.
There's something different about it that he didn't get. And I guess it is that self-actualization and really recognizing these stepping stones to that, that she created and made for herself. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I loved it.
Especially since it's carried out in such an unusual context. Who would think that a story like this would lead to a message about reinvention, self-actualization, sovereignty.
Yeah.
It's interesting that it's set in Victorian England because it's not a time when those sorts of things were really very well
But
accepted.
they had flying machines, so I don't know how
Yeah.
Victorian it was. It was interesting. It was kind of
But yeah, it's got a great production design. It's got great cinematography. It's got terrific performances across the board. I mean,
Mark Ruffalo
Emma
was
Stone in the lead,
brilliant.
and then Willem Dafoe and Mark Ruffalo in the supporting performances. This is a movie that really jumps out at you. And
The madam was perfect.
yes. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now the one thing I think we should probably, let viewers know is that there is a lot of very explicit sexuality in this film.
Yeah, I wouldn't bring
So
it.
if those are the kinds of things that you're easily offended about, or you're sensitive to, then don't see it, because
Yeah, it's a lot of nudity.
it'll be too much for you.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I liked about the sexual stuff is that so much of it was so hilarious. Yeah, it can't be. I mean, I was laughing my behind off all throughout this movie. And
yeah,
even at times when it starts to turn a little more serious, it's still funny.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to pull off. And it's done very well here. So this is a movie that's gotten a lot of award season buzz. It's ended up on a lot of, 10 best lists, probably will end up on mine.
Yeah.
I just really enjoyed this one a great deal. And I'm going to give it 4 out of 5.
I'd give it 4.5 out of 5. I loved it.
Yeah, the only thing that I thought is there were a few spots in the middle where it dragged just a little bit. So, not enough to say I disliked it, but I think that the pace could have been quickened a little bit during the middle part. But beyond that, I mean, everything else about this is just terrific.
Yeah, agreed. Let me share my screen again. Hang on.
Okay, so next we have a movie that I have been waiting for a long time to see.
Me too.
Primarily because I was waiting for it to come to streaming. And that's Martin Scorsese's latest, Killers of the Flower Moon, his epic story. It's a sort of a modern day Western in many ways. And I liked it, but it's still a little long. It's 3 hours and 26 minutes.
I don't think it needs to be that long.
No, I don't either. I think it could
have cut out an hour of it, and it's still.
Yeah, I think they could have cut out some of the detail, particularly in the opening portion of the film, because I thought the second half was definitely better than the first.
Yeah.
But in terms of the story it told about how white swindlers came into Oklahoma in the 1920s and tried to steal the assets of Native Americans who discovered oil on their land, it really pulls no punches when it comes to examining themes related to greed, deceit, all that sort of thing. And just shows you how much these people were screwed over by the people who invade their land.
This is a true story. It's a true story where they literally, wiped out one family, almost wiped out one family's whole line.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Intentionally. I mean, it wasn't something that was opportunistic or came along by accident. It was deliberate.
It was brutal. It was brutal in that respect, how greedy people can be.
Absolutely. Now, the one thing that I was a little bit kind of pleasantly surprised by this is that Scorsese's films tend to be uber violent in many ways. And this has violence in it, but it wasn't to the degree
subtle.
where you were seeing stuff happening like every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So that I have to give him some credit for that. He managed to kind of rein that in a story where he could have let it run wild if he wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he did a good job at the end. That was interesting. It was interesting that he put himself in there. That was interesting. Yes. The actors were brilliant.
Absolutely. I mean, I was really very stunned at how good the performances were. I mean, DiCaprio and De Niro in particular were just outstanding.
De Niro was understated and brilliant.
And a very different kind of role for him, too.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody who's very two-faced
and evil.
And evil. and not necessarily being out and out, let's go shoot them up.
Yeah, and just absolutely no moral compunction at all.
And DiCaprio, I thought, was excellent as his dim-witted nephew, who
Yeah, and he was torn. He was torn, and you could see that in him. He didn't know, He
but
loved.
he never got it right, and that's the
No.
other thing I thought was interesting. I mean, even right up until the point where he has a chance to completely exonerate himself, he still can't do it.
Yeah,
which I thought was really interesting.
He's greedy. He admitted how greedy he was, and you could see that he loved his wife.
Yep.
Yeah, he just couldn't come clean at the end.
Yep.
One more thing I mean, it was all bad what came out, and she was still willing to forgive him, I think.
Yep.
If he had said that one thing, but he wouldn't do it.
The other things I liked about this is I thought it had a beautiful production design in terms of the period piece elements that were just put together perfectly. I had good cinematography. Despite the length of the story, I thought the writing was really good. I mean, it never really lost my interest.
Right.
Even when it seemed like this is going on forever, it still never really lost my interest.
Yeah.
And I also really liked the soundtrack by the late Robbie Robertson.
Yes.
I thought it was really,
it was sad because, it was his last thing that he did.
Yep.
He died.
And he did a great job with it.
Yeah, he did.
So this one, I'm glad I finally saw it because I was really kind of dreading having to sit through something that lengthy, even if
I was so happy that we saw it at home.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I
had to watch it in 2 installments.
Me too.
It was almost like watching a mini series more than a standalone movie.
The first 45 minutes were so long. We thought it's surely 2 hours has gone by. That's what it felt like, 45 minutes. And then we took a little break, made some popcorn, came back, and watched it to the end. But yeah, I mean, I didn't fall asleep, so that was good. But it's long. It was like 3.5 hours. That's a big movie.
I mean, I can see where this really was a labor of love for Scorsese. It shows in every aspect of it, even if the length is a little too long.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I'm hoping that this movie kind of brought home to roost the debate about putting intermissions back.
Yes.
Because 3 hours and 26 minutes to sit without an intermission just is unrealistic.
I mean, I don't think he lost money because it cost a lot of money to stream it. But at the same time, I don't think that many movie goers went and sat through it.
No. Well, it's actually still in theaters, and that's been there since the end of October, which is kind of unusual these days for a movie to stay there that long.
Yeah.
But I really hope that this has brought home the intermission question to distributors to think about what they do in the future, because there have been a lot of movies over the years shorter than this.
I thought that was Scorsese who said he wouldn't allow it.
He wouldn't allow it. Well, and the distributors didn't allow it either, because there were some theaters
they wanted
that put one in of their own, and they were threatening to sue them because, hey, this violates your license with us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's interesting because I read a piece on Yahoo News that was talking about the fact that a lot of theater owners want intermissions to come back. They think it's more important so that viewers have a break if they need to get up and use facilities and so forth, and so that they can sell some more concessions.
Absolutely.
And that's where movie theaters make most of their money anyways. So, I mean, why not do it? What difference does it make if you have a 10-minute break in the middle?
Yeah.
That just doesn't make sense to me.
That movie, I think we needed that break. Sorry, but we needed that break in that movie.
I honestly don't think that, I watched about halfway through and then stopped and then watched the other half the next day. I don't think it lost anything by taking a break.
No.
There's no artistic continuity issues or anything like that.
You know what? We went to a theater last weekend, and it was one of the newer theaters. It had a seat that goes back, but the legs didn't come up. I'm 5'2". My feet didn't touch the ground. Now, I was super uncomfortable because the row in front of me was so far I couldn't reach it to put my leg up, and I couldn't touch the ground. So my feet are kind of hanging. If I had sat for 3.5 hours like that,
Oh no.
I was losing it after an hour and a half. I'm like, this is like so uncomfortable. Like, and they had no boosters because normally I would go get a booster and put it
Yeah.
on the ground and just put my feet up, right? That way you have like a little step stool. They didn't have those. So I was like, wow, this is
Wow.
so uncomfortable. Like they never thought of that. Like, unless you're tall, it's not
Yeah.
happening. Or at least 5'5", anyway.
So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out during award season because it's gotten a lot of recognition. It's gotten
It's
a
a
lot
good
of
movie. There's no
nominations
doubt
already.
it's a good movie.
It is a good movie. I would give it 3.5 to 4.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so next we have another really good film
I just lost
that
one.
hasn't gotten a whole lot of play, but it's definitely worth seeing. It's a new movie from Japan called Monster. And this is the latest film from director Koreeda Hirokazu, who made such excellent films as Broker and The Shoplifters and Afterlife. I mean, he's really quite an accomplished and prolific director. And this is an interesting story in the fact that it tells the same story from multiple perspectives. And it drives home the idea of, do we really know what we're seeing and how quick are we to judge it?
Mm.
That's important, I think, in this day and age when you look at people being so judgmental on social media and things like that. This movie basically tells you to sit back and see the whole story before you say anything.
Yeah.
And it's told in essentially 3 segments. And it centers around a troubled preteen kid, his friend, his school teacher, and his single mother. And I really don't want to say a whole lot more than that at this point because that would probably give away too much about the story. But essentially, each segment focuses on one character or group of characters in telling the story. And you see certain elements repeating, but you also see new things being introduced in each segment.
Mhm.
And that makes it curious because you're saying, oh, I didn't think it was going to be that way, you know. But then that helps to drive home the point of what this film is getting across. The fact that, look for the whole truth and not just what your surface impressions are.
Yeah.
This is a story technique that was first developed many years ago by one of Koreeda's fellow countrymen, Akira Kurosawa, in a 1950s screen classic called Rashomon, where you see the same story told from about 4 different perspectives. And each time you see a new segment, you're getting a new take on what actually unfolded.
Which is life.
Yeah. And the thing is, it just gets increasingly more intriguing the more you see the whole story. And it makes you much more reluctant to want to just say, oh, well, it's this or it's that or whatever. I mean, you actually want to see the whole thing play out before you end up coming to a conclusion of
What is it they say? It's his and her story, his story, and the truth, something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's it. And that's what this film does.
All about perspective.
It's interesting too in the fact that there's a couple of little sort of sidebar stories in this film that you kind of keep wondering, how do they tie in? Well, you eventually find out, but the thing is, I mean, it just kind of adds more intrigue and mystery to the film as it's playing out. I really like this movie a lot. I mean, it took a lot of awards at film festivals last year. It hasn't been mentioned very much in connection with award season this year, which really kind of surprises me. I think it's one of the better foreign films that came out this year. It's been playing in limited release theatrically. I'm sure it's going to be coming to streaming probably pretty soon. I definitely recommend this one a lot. I mean, my partner Trevor went to the movie with me, not expecting a whole lot, and he was riveted. I mean, he was sitting there. Yeah, I mean, he was like staring intently at the screen the whole time. And when it was finished, I said, "What'd you think?" He's like, "That was way more than I was expecting." So I recommend this one very highly.
Wait to see it. I love
it. And I'm going to give this one 4.5.
All right. Wow, that's good. That's big time. All right, go see.
Okay, and the last of our featured movies today is a documentary that's available for streaming on Netflix called American Symphony. And this is probably one of the most beautifully filmed, intimately told love stories I have ever seen. It looks at the year 2022 from the perspective of musician and composer John Batiste and his wife Suleika Jawad. And he was having a banner year. I mean, he was coming off winning an Oscar for co-writing the score to the movie Soul. And then on top of that, he ended up getting 5 Grammys, and he was host of the band leader for Late Night with Stephen Colbert. I mean, he was just having all this incredible success. His wife, meanwhile, who was a best-selling author, had a relapse of a form of leukemia that she had experienced a decade earlier. And it was the story of having to deal with these polar opposite conditions. And how does a couple get through something like that? He's having the year of his life, and she's having one of the worst times of her life at the same time. Yet their love and devotion and commitment to one another is just so palpable in this film that you just fall in love with the two of them, seeing them struggling with these conditions and trying to work them out. In many ways, I mean, this really is almost like the embodiment of the opening line from A Tale of Two Cities, of it being the best of times and the worst of times.
Yeah.
And also, seeing what he goes through in terms of trying to remain grounded throughout all this, in terms of how can I enjoy my success when I know that the woman I love so dearly is going through this. So seeing his level of commitment to her is just astounding as well. I was really blown away by this one. I just absolutely fell in love with the film. It's one of these movies that when you're watching, you can't look away. I mean, you just want to see what's coming next. And it's another film it's been getting a lot of awards buzz. It captured a couple of Critics' Choice Documentary Awards already. And I think it has a very good shot of being in the running for some of the big prizes this year. And like I say, it's available for streaming on Netflix, so it's easy to find. I would give this one 4.5 out of 5.
Wow.
Yeah.
That good.
So those are our featured films. We have a few that I want to talk about just kind of in passing that I think are worth your time as well. The first one is called El Conde, which is another Netflix offering. El Conde is Spanish for the Count. And this is a story that in its own interesting way is kind of strange, like Poor Things is. It tells a sort of a metaphorical biography of Augusto Pinochet, who was the dictator who took over in Chile after the 1973 coup and ran the country with an iron fist for 17 years. The thing that's interesting about this one is the director has decided that he was going to tell the story from a metaphorical standpoint, where Pinochet is portrayed as a vampire.
Oh, good.
And kind of in terms of what he did to the country, well, I'm sure there's a lot of people who would say, yes, that's a very fitting, appropriate label for him. It's told from a sort of a surrealistic standpoint. It's filmed in black and white, gorgeously, beautiful production design. In many ways, it's reminiscent of the 1922 silent film Nosferatu. And it's really very well put together, very clever. It's a movie from director Pablo Larraín, who I'm convinced is one of the best directors in the business these days. He is best known for the Oscar-winning film A Fantastic Woman, as well as the character studies Jackie and Spencer. And he's really come up with another hit with this one, in my view. Just really interesting to watch. Funny, campy. There are a few moments where it's a little violent, so again, sensitive viewers should be aware of it, but it's kind of like campy vampiric scenes, so it only kind of adds to the mood of the movie. And there's not that many of them, but there are a few that are kind of pretty graphic. So again, if you're sensitive to that sort of thing, you might want to avoid this one. I give this one 3.5 out of 5. Okay. Another one that I recommend. This is also available for streaming on the Max streaming service and several other platforms. It's a film biography of Little Richard called Little Richard, I Am Everything. this is a really eye-opening film in many ways, in the fact that it shows you a lot about Little Richard that you probably didn't know. I mean, certainly he's known for his outlandish flamboyance and his brilliant performances on stage, but he gets into a lot of things that probably a lot of people don't know about. And one of the things that's most obvious about this is the fact that he really is the king of rock and roll, and was never really given full credit for it, because when you see interviews and footage of a number of other artists from that era and from later, just how much of an influence he was on them and didn't receive the recognition for it. This is a really very captivating film. And if you're a Little Richard fan or you're a rock and roll fan, I recommend watching it, because I think you'll come away from it with your eyes open in terms of who he was and just how much influence he had.
Jerry Lee Lewis was around the same time as Little Richard, right? They were kind of the white and black counterpart of one another.
Yes.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even people like Elvis, and in years later, David Bowie, they all said, hey, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Little Richard. Mick Jagger, same thing, I mean, and a lot of these people are actually interviewed in the film too. So, I mean, you have some very interesting firsthand insights about, who he was and how much he influenced them. So this one I recommend highly. This one gets 4 out of 5.
I think Rick James kind of put himself a little bit after Little Richard.
Kind of, yeah. So next we have another documentary. This is one that explores the strange and interesting story of a fundamentalist Christian missionary named John Chow, who took upon himself the mission of trying to convert the inhabitants of an indigenous tribe that live on some very remote islands in the Indian Ocean. And he was really advised against doing this. I mean, he was young and inexperienced, for one thing, but also the fact that even people who were seasoned missionaries were saying, hey, there's a lot of danger in this, not to mention the fact that some of the things that you're going to need to do to pull this off are illegal. But he felt compelled to carry forward with this, and well, he ended up disappearing. And nobody knows definitively what happened to him. But the thing that was interesting in this film is the way it not only tells his story, but it's a very balanced approach in terms of saying, is this somebody who is living out a passion that they feel they need to do, or is it somebody who is afflicted with a Messiah complex? And you could easily come to either conclusion as being true as a result of watching this film.
Which religion was he pushing?
He was a fundamentalist Christian. He was a student at Oral Roberts University.
Okay.
And even a lot of the people who were there, who he was studying with, were telling him at the time, John, don't try this. This is madness. I mean, we appreciate what you're trying to do with your work, but you're just carrying this a little too far, especially given where you want to go and the conditions you're going to face. I mean,
did he disappear by himself, or did he have some people with him that disappeared?
Well, he ended up, to get to the islands themselves, he had to hire pirates to take him on the boat to get him to this location. So then when he got off the boat, he was by himself, and that was kind of the last that anybody saw of him. Interestingly enough, they found his journal, but they didn't find any remnants of him. Wow. So they don't know specifically what happened. It's rumored that the indigenous residents of the island were possibly cannibals. Nobody really knows, because they have such a reputation for being so dangerous that nobody wants to go there.
Wow.
And the Indian government, which has got control over the islands, has basically imposed an embargo on anybody going there to visit it. So that's why he had to even break the law to go there, which people said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" But it's a very compelling story, and it's come under a lot of criticism from some people who think it's nothing more than just fundamentalist Christian propaganda. But it's really not, in the fact that you know, they were not afraid to question the fact that was this guy just kind of out of his league and out of his mind, maybe, in terms of taking on a task like this. I mean, that's where the whole notion of the Messiah
He's living like a
comes up.
god on the island.
Yeah. I mean,
Who knows?
exactly. I mean, it was kind of missionary work taken to an illogical extreme in some ways. So
That's funny.
I really like this one. I'm giving this one 4.5 out of 5.
Oh, okay. Wow.
It might be a little bit hard to find. It is available for streaming, but it's exclusively on Hulu at this point, as far as I know. So if you want to see it, that's probably where you're going
We
to
don't get it in Canada.
Yeah, and even in the US, it's you know, a lot of times when things go on streaming here in the US, it'll go on multiple platforms at the same time. When I looked it up, it was only on Hulu. And I was fortunate enough to catch it because I recently canceled my Hulu subscription, so I saw it right before it went away. So,
okay.
But it's good. It's well worth it.
All right.
Okay, and then the last of our passing films is a new release that's come out in theaters called American Fiction.
I love this actor.
Yeah, I do too. And this is definitely Jeffrey Wright's best performance. I mean, he's really excellent in the film. But I'm giving this one a very conditional recommendation because it struggles to tell two stories in the same film. One of which is told brilliantly, one of which weighs the film down too much. Essentially, it's the story of a talented but commercially unsuccessful Black author who is grown tired of writing books that nobody reads, despite the critical acclaim behind them. And he grows especially incensed when he sees a peer who has written a quote unquote Black book that relies on all kinds of stereotypes and, you know,
tropes. And
yeah, I mean, it's just everything about it is so cliched, and that becomes a hit. So as a protest, he decides under pseudonym he's going to write his own Black book just to see what happens too. And the thing is, it ends up becoming a runaway hit.
Oh my God.
Then he's faced with the question of what do I do now?
Does he want to own up to it?
Yeah, I mean, he's afraid that it's going to ruin him for life. He's afraid that, you know, it's going to ruin his chances for having his previous books recognized, you know, all that sort of thing. So the very big questions of integrity coming up in that. There's also a very strong satirical element running through it in terms of what really qualifies as good African-American literature and not.
Yeah.
Now that all of that is done brilliantly. I mean, it's really funny. It's really incisive. It's really on target. But it's combined with a story about the author and his own family relations. And part of that is reflective of how he conducts himself in terms of the writing issues. But the bigger problem is the fact that it just gets too much play in the script and it weighs it down. And it's really, every time the story switches from the satire back to the family drama, it slows down. And it's a shame too, because the supporting cast in the family drama is really well done. I mean, Tracy Ellis Ross and Sterling K. Brown, Leslie Uggams, I mean, all really top-notch performers. But it really just takes the story and slows it down to a snail's pace. And you can't wait for it to get back to the satire. You know, so that's one of the reasons why I'm giving it kind of a conditional recommendation. I really wish they had just focused on the satire. It would have been a much better picture.
Yeah.
And because of that, I'm going to give this one 3 out of 5. Okay. And I think I'm being kind of generous on that. I mean, it's primarily because of the brilliance of the satire and because of the brilliance of the performance of Jeffrey Wright. I mean, this, like I say, this is the best work he's done. He's probably going to get an Oscar nomination for this. Which would he is first. I mean, he's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
You know, but he's really good in this, and you know, just I would say just bear that in mind if you decide to go see this in the theater. So, and then to close out, we have our returning feature of One to Avoid, and that's Maestro, the film biography of Leonard Bernstein by Bradley Cooper. I watched this on streaming from Netflix, and I was watching it and saying to myself, what is this movie really about? It switches back and forth between Bernstein's career and his relationship with his wife, played by Carey Mulligan. And it seemed like the movie could never really make up its mind what it wanted to be, which is unfortunate because Bernstein is such an interesting character.
I got a phone call. You have to watch Maestro. Oh, watch it. Bradley Cooper. He wrote it. He directed it. He starred in it. It's brilliant. I'm in 20 minutes in. I'm like, oh, God, can I go to sleep? Like, this is so, I was like done. I go,
yeah, I mean, the thing that really surprised me is, I mean, I was watching and not really liking it. And I said
I
to
didn't
myself,
like it at all.
oh, it's like, okay, so maybe it's just me. But then virtually everybody I know who has watched this has said, boy, did that suck.
But Bernstein's family likes it.
They produced it too.
I mean, yeah, but they like it. That blew me away. Like, they think it's right on. So
I mean, the two things I did like about it, I thought the black and white cinematography was gorgeous. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. However, I'm also at a loss to understand why I was switching back and forth between black and white and color. It's never really explained. I mean, when a director takes a movie and makes, a conscious decision to change tracks with an artistic aspect, there's usually a very clear reason behind it. And there really isn't in this case. So that made me kind of scratch my head. The other thing I really loved about this movie was Carey Mulligan. I mean, she is just luminescent in this part. And I think it's probably some of the best work she's done.
She's a great actress. I really
it's a shame that she didn't have better material to work with here. And that brings me to the things that don't work about this movie. The writing doesn't work. Like I say, the artistic switches back and forth didn't work. Bradley Cooper is just mugging for the camera and overacting severely throughout this film, as if he's almost kind of saying to the audience, I know I'm going to get recognition for this, so you better watch me. I mean, it really was a big disappointment in so many respects.
I didn't like it at all. And I mean, I remember first hearing about it because people were up in arms that he had a prosthetic on his nose, and but he said, look at, people that I don't mind, because you're trying to look like a character. He's playing a real person. You're trying to look as physically as much as possible as that person. He did look like him a little bit.
Yes.
That didn't bother me. They're saying, oh, it's a Jewish, thing. No, it wasn't. He looked like Bernstein. Bernstein, not all Jews have big noses. Bernstein didn't have a huge nose, but it was bigger than Bradley's nose, right? Like that. So that didn't bother me at all. But it was boring. That bothered me.
Well, and the other thing too is, I mean, there's one scene in the film where the Jewish question is raised, and he's getting advice from a Russian emigre who told him, based on his experience with trying to be out publicly as a Jew in Russia, didn't work. So he was saying to him, you might want to consider changing your name to Leonard Burns instead of Leonard Bernstein.
Yeah.
And the thing that really surprised me is it was introduced in that one scene and never talked about ever again in the rest of the film. Now, if this is supposed to be such a big issue and it was such a big concern in his life, why aren't you doing more with it? And it's sort of like thrown out and then left to just sort of lay there and rot in the sun, and not get developed any further. And there's a lot of aspects in this film that are like that, which just made me scratch my head. And it came down to me for being a question of the writing, which Bradley Cooper did himself also. I mean, it's almost like he was trying to do too much with, the writing and the acting and the directing and producing and so forth. This was a project that was originally conceived of by Steven Spielberg, and he was going to direct it. And he ended up seeing an early cut of Bradley Cooper's first film, A Star is Born, and was so impressed with that he said, I want you to direct Maestro. Now, I'm a little puzzled by that because I didn't think A Star is Born was that great a picture. I mean, it was okay, but I mean, it was, but it didn't strike me as the kind of film that made me say, I must have this man.
Well, I mean, it was the third or the fourth iteration of it. What I loved about A Star is Born was really Lady Gaga.
Yeah, she was great.
down, like not all made up, not with her
Yeah.
blonde hair, like just more natural. She looked more beautiful that way
Yeah.
than she does any other way.
Yeah,
Like that was,
absolutely.
enticing, I think, about that movie, even more
Yes.
so than anything.
But I was surprised to see that was enough to make Spielberg want to hand over the project to him. And he handed it over, and unfortunately, I think he put it in bad hands. I mean, it just
It's
didn't
too much
work.
sometimes to do everything. And you got
Yeah,
no one to when you do so much stuff and it's so much in your heart and in your head, it's really hard to let somebody else be that sounding block for you and tell you, well, that's not really good. Go, well, wait a minute.
Yep.
I've done all this. It's all really great.
Well, and in the end, I think really the best way I can describe this is it was really more of a tribute to Bradley Cooper's own ego than it was an homage to his subject of the film.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate because, again, like I said, I think Bernstein deserved a better picture than this. And I think Carey Mulligan deserved a better picture than this. Because if she had had a better script